and mess up the flowers and then
Let's make a
They're wild.
pact to do better.
They're wild flowers.
This has been crazy. This late
She has a
legislation
plan.
and all
They're
this
cosmos
stuff.
and sunflowers. And the sunflowers are over 8 foot tall. Yep.
Coburn. We're talking about Evelyn Park?
Who?
Evelyn Park or no? Okay, never mind.
No,
She has the
no.
same concern too, but the garden and flowers in the front yard.
I'm sorry.
No, is this the same person though or no?
Do you remember last
Yeah,
week?
she's here.
I had
It's,
that
there's
call.
3 houses, so that could be a different name than the name I know.
From
First
Fay
place.
Up from there on Fernwood or East Fernwood. Yeah.
But it was on
62.
2 different,
The
no,
one lady,
kids.
her husband was my best man in my wedding, so she showed up at my shop, bawling her eyes out.
Thursday, second, and then
It'll be handled.
Ward 1 is what I call it. She called me too.
They don't know how to handle
his tee off.
Here are numbered
was
Taylor's.
45.
Yeah, she called Erica too.
So,
Who?
but he won.
This is for the
Anyway, it was
people
all
on
good.
Bluffton.
Yeah.
Yeah. She didn't call you
Oh, I tried to do it.
Many
I
times.
quit.
Many.
Tried to
about
do
the
it.
flowers?
It's just too much stuff to get done. And I don't want to work that hard.
But she's so old.
I know, and I was so sympathetic, but I'm like,
You good?
I don't know what this is. I don't have, is it this?
What did you tell her she could do that?
I didn't tell her she could do anything.
Oh, okay.
My response
Fine,
was,
just got
I'll
out of
check
a-
into it. To everything. You know,
Why
I've
did
been
she
here.
call you from
She
two?
called her because she told her there
Alright,
was
so before we
nothing
call
she
that-
could do about
Who?
it. That's what she said.
No, she asked me when I was up for reelection.
Until we get to that?
Because she was complaining about legal things going on. I asked her if she called the police, and she said she only, yeah.
That's the number I
It was,
gave
it
you.
was, it was very, yeah.
She called me. That's why the number I gave it to you at large.
Oh,
No, this is Kathy Krunich.
oh no, that was a different one. There was many.
Yeah, this is Kathy Krunich.
This one, resolution was taken out.
We are live, guys, just so you know.
Be on the November 8th.
Kathy's a former city employee.
Oh yeah, no, then not
Those are
her.
the only
Oh, I
three.
know
They
what
did
that
this.
is.
And
Yeah.
Joyce is tracking on the.
So she was okay with the flower thing, or you don't know? Oh, that was something else.
We couldn't amend this until today anyways. But that was just something
You're not
else.
allowed to do that.
That's going to be. I appreciate it. Yeah.
But she was crying that she read it, but they weren't allowed to have them in their front yard. Her entire yard is an English garden.
Sounds good. Starting out, you again?
Yeah, that would kind of be a site thing, I would think.
They had one complaint, they've been there 47 years, and somebody complained, so,
You know, something
no, I
different.
said, work with the.
About what?
No briefcase today.
Yeah, but if you can't do it, how can you work with them?
I mean, but how long did your hair get?
All right, we're going to begin in 30 seconds.
To her?
I told her not to get so high.
To the large gallery, please ensure your phones are off or on silent. Council members, ensure that your microphones are on.
Or more. That's a military tactic there. They're thieves.
It's all good.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming in. This is a special legislative meeting for Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, August 1st, 2022. It is 6:02 p.m. I call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, as we start our last meeting before recess, watch over us, guide us, help us make the best decisions for the citizens. Watch over the first responders, firefighters, police, military. Always remember the 22. Amen.
Amen.
Clerk, please call the roll.
President Greer,
Present.
Mr. Heidick,
Here.
Mrs. Thompson,
Here.
Mrs. Bailey,
Here.
Mrs. Angela,
Here.
Mr. Griffin,
Here.
Mr. Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. Frye.
Here.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held Monday, July 25th, 2022, as presented. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting from Monday, July 25th, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. And Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion to approve the minutes from Monday, July 25th, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. 25th. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, July 25th, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Acceptance of the finance report for the month of June 2022 as presented. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion for the acceptance of the Finance Department report for the month of June 2022, as presented.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn?
I'll second that motion for approval.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to accept the finance report for the month of June 2022 as presented. Are there any remarks? I'll make one. This was because we didn't call for it last week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Startled.
But we do have the, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The financial report is adopted. First readings of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 114-2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Appropriation Courts. An ordinance appropriating $300,000 from the unappropriated item of the court's 211 Special Project Building Fund to the capital outlay of the court's Special Project Building Fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
No. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 114-2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 114-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
No.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 98-2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Designated Outdoor Refreshment Area. An ordinance establishing a designated outdoor refreshment area, DORA, per Ohio Revised Code 4301.82, and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading, This is the third reading. The first reading was on July 11th, 2022, and the second reading was on July 25th, 2022.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 98-2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Angela?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff to adopt ordinance number 98-2022. Are there any remarks? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. A lot of work has gone into this, a lot of back and forth. I do support it. However, I am the general manager of a business that is in this district that does carry a D-class permit license, so I will be abstaining from the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. Is there any other remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick abstains. Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Resolution number 100-2022, presented by Mr. Hyde. Title, Tax Levy Police. A resolution determining to proceed with the submission of the question of an additional tax levy in excess of the 10 mil limitation for the purpose of the acquisition, construction, improvement, or maintenance of buildings, equipment, and supplies for police pursuant to section 5705.19 ZZ of the revised code and declaring an emergency. This is a first reading. The first reading was July 11th, 2022. The second reading was July 25th, 2022, and this is the third and final reading.
Thank you. Before we proceed, I know that there's amendments to this piece of resolution. Mr. Heidick, do you have an explanation?
Yes, there just needs to be some language cleaned up in it, so I will entertain a motion from the Finance Committee to amend this resolution. The first whereas says Resolution number 95, amend to 115. The adopted by this council says July 25th, amend to 28. The third whereas has a period of 10 years, amend that to say a continuing period of time. Do I have a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Clerk, can you read that again as amended?
Yes, sir. Resolution number 100-2022, presented by Mr. Hyde. Title, Tax Levy Police. A resolution determining to proceed with the submission of a question of an additional tax levy in excess of the 10 mil limitation for the purpose of the acquisition, construction, improvement, or maintenance of buildings, equipment, and supplies for police pursuant to section 5705.19 ZZ of the revised code and declaring an emergency, as amended on the floor with the Finance Committee today, the third reading. The first reading was July 11th, 2022, and the second reading was July 25th, 2022. This is the third, final, and amended reading.
Thank you, Clerk. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Angela?
Mr. President, if we can have our clerk read the corrected whereas on these two, so we have it on record.
Yes, absolutely.
The first whereas pursuant to Resolution 115-2022, adopted by this council on July 28th, 2022, the resolution of necessity, this city requested the county fiscal officer to certify the total current tax valuation of the city and the dollar amount of revenue that would be generated by a 0.75 mils for the purposes set forth in Section 1 hereof. There was also a change in the third whereas. Whereas this council has determined that it is necessary to submit to the electors of the city the question of the levy of an additional tax in excess of the 10 mil limitation of the rate of 0.75 mils for each dollar of tax value, which amounts to 7.5 cents for each $100 of tax valuation for a continuing period of time. The strike-through will be where it said a period of 10 years. It is amended to say for a continuing period of time, commencing with the levy on the tax list and duplicate for the year 2022 to be first due and distributed to the city in calendar year 2023 as described below.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angela. We can keep that. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Resolution number 100-2022 as amended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt Resolution number 100-2022 as amended. Is there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Thank you.
This ends the third reading.
The motion for adoption carries. Miscellaneous and unfinished business, this wasn't on the agenda. However, I would look for a motion to excuse Mr. Heidick from the special legislative meeting held July 28th, 2022. Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to motion to excuse Mr. Heidick for July 28th, 2022's meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second Mrs. Thompson's motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. It was motioned by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Fry to excuse Mr. Heidick from the special legislative meeting held July 28th, 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, Mr. Heidick's excused. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Heidick?
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Mrs. Thompson? Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 6:14 PM. Thank you.
You're